Hello, everyone. I attended the sentencing of a very well-known individual who was part of the, shall we say, Day of Infamy in 2021. Played a very interesting role as a provocateur. And I was only one of less than 12 people who attended his sentencing hearing. And I wanted to talk about it. Unfortunately, I still don't have my tripod fixed, so I won't be on camera for this video. However, I've gotten word that the tripod head has been repaired, and so it should be back very soon. I'll be back on camera very soon. Now, I've done a longer form. I just recorded and I'm uploading a longer form video on this, going into detail, showing clips of Epps and what he did prior to the night before and on that day of infamy. And that also talks about I attended the sentencing of another individual who was a journalist that was charged literally for being a journalist on that day. And I compare and contrast the two. But I wanted to do a shorter video for people who are busy. I know not everybody has an hour to devote to this stuff. I wanted to do a shorter video just covering exactly what I saw at the sentencing hearing. So let's go ahead and get into it. Before I do, though, just want to remind people that I've gone down and attended these hearings. You know, I still have all the other stuff I'm working on, my documentary. If you want to support my work, the links to do that are in the video description. If you want to help your girl out, throw her a couple bucks so I can keep going to these things and attending them. That would be amazing. All right, so let's go ahead and bring up my thread from Ray Epps sentencing, which I just attended on January 9th. Today is the 12th. So let's go ahead and go through it. It was, as I say here, a farce. So this is the building, by the way, the district court in Washington, D.C. Judge Boasberg was presiding. This is in courtroom 22A. And it's interesting because Judge Boasberg is kind of known as the secret FISA court judge. So just the fact that he was assigned this, I just thought that was kind of interesting. All right, so let's go ahead and begin with the bizarre nature of this. Even the Epps sentencing memo, which I can bring up, it reads like something that was written by a defense lawyer, like how a defense lawyer might try to describe their client in the most favorable light, and it's completely different from how they're treating every other defendant that has been charged in connection to this day of infamy. As you know, because of the algorithm and things of this nature, I'm going to use abbreviations for things or my own words for them. So just bear with me. You know what I'm talking about, though. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyways, I see a lot of people covering the Ray Epps sentencing, and they're only reading from the memo. But if you weren't there to see what happened at the hearing, boy, are you missing out, because that was wild, and I've not seen anybody else reporting the details of what happened in the courtroom. I was there for you guys on your behalf, so I'm going to give you that unique perspective. So the prosecutor was praising Ray Epps for his quote-unquote de-escalation tactics. Now, he had a slideshow he was playing. He was showing little clips, but he brought up a slide, and the slide says attempts to de-escalate, and then it goes through I'm looking at this thinking that's something you would expect the defense lawyers to put on. And so let me just set the backdrop here. The courthouse, when you go into the courtroom, where Judge Boasberg's courtroom, it is like very long and rectangular. So he's in the back there, and then there were 5 people up against the right wall that looked like they were part of a Soviet tribunal. I don't know who those individuals were. And then there was the prosecutor at the prosecution table. But on the defense side, on Ray Epps' side, Epps didn't have to show up. He was allowed to appear remotely via video conference, and so were his lawyers. The lawyers didn't even have to show up in person, which, again, I was shocked because I haven't seen something like this before, where these people are being given this seemingly deferential, preferential treatment where you don't even have to show up to your hearing. And I can assure you it was not the case with Stephen Horn, who is the independent journalist that had his sentencing hearing the next day in the same building, and I attended his hearing as well. Go watch the longer video if you want the contrast of those two, but I'm telling you, this was just, I've never seen anything like it. And so both Judge Boasberg and the prosecutor agreed that he never tried to go into the Capitol, talking about Ray Epps. And this is not true. Epps' lawyer said this, and the prosecutor and the judge, Judge Boasberg, all agreed. But we've seen video of him after Samsel takes down a barricade, he's rushing forward with a group of people. He may at another point turn around after riling other people up and not go in himself, but to suggest that he didn't try, I think is reaching. But that's what was going on here, just the level of reaching to explain away his behavior and why he's not being subject to the harsh treatment that others are getting. The prosecutor claimed he struggled and that he could give Epps a felony with a low sentence or a misdemeanor with a high sentence. Again, I've never seen something like this where a prosecutor would basically say that they had already predetermined the outcome and that this was essentially just a formality. But like for anybody else, if you are a part of this specific case, like they are not giving people the benefit of the doubt. They're not saying, oh, we're going to give you a low sentence and just one felony like they are giving people numerous charges, as many as they can, and they're seeking the maximum, the harshest penalties for them. So for him to say this again just highlights and underscores why everybody was suspicious of Epps to begin with, this seemingly preferential treatment. The prosecutor claimed Epps' case was a, quote, unique and complicated case. Again, I don't see how, when you compare it to there's been over, 1,000 arrests from the day of infamy and prosecutions to date. When you look at these other cases, how is Epps any different from those cases? What specifically makes it unique and complicated other than the preferential treatment he's being given? I don't see any other day of infamy defendant getting this type of special treatment where a prosecutor claims their case is quote unquote unique. The prosecutor said they used their prosecutorial discretion to choose to charge Epps with a misdemeanor, just one misdemeanor, despite that same prosecutor arguing not 10 minutes earlier that Epps had engaged in felonious conduct, and he goes and outlines all the ways in which he had done so. The government agrees with Ray Epps' defense lawyers' arguments regarding quote-unquote mitigating factors for Epps, which again is just amazing. Epps and his lawyers, along with the government and Judge Boasberg, all agreed Epps was the victim of, quote, widespread conspiracy theories. The DOJ themselves admitted that they were giving Epps a quote-unquote significant break. That is a direct quote from the prosecutor. He then argued that 6 months is the appropriate sentence, pretending like they wanted him incarcerated for 6 months. We all know if they wanted him incarcerated, as the prosecutor had just outlined his felonious conduct, they could have charged him with a felony and recommended he go to jail for several years, like they have for other people who did similar things that day. The prosecution then proceeded to praise Ray Epps, claiming he actually supported law enforcement officers that day. Again, it's like, are you arguing on his behalf or are you here to sentence him, sir? I'm confused. Ray Epps' lawyers pointed out that Epps called the FBI almost immediately, January 8, 2021, and he gave voluntary statements and cooperated. Well, Mr. Horn, the journalist who was charged with 4 misdemeanors, had done something very similar. He called almost immediately law enforcement, let them know he was there covering the event as a journalist and could provide a copy of the footage that he had obtained while documenting the event. Epps was allowed to speak. This is the other thing. He looks very different than how he looked that day. He looks like he's lost weight. He's grown a mustache. He was wearing a black button-down shirt and suit jacket. And he was appearing remotely again via video teleconference with his lawyers. The lawyers were not in the same room as him. They must have been appearing from their offices. He was appearing from his home, and he was allowed to give a statement, and he goes on this kind of, I guess you could call it a tirade. I mean, he wasn't like raising his voice or anything, but he was trying to blame other people for his behavior and explain away, not actually take accountability for anything except to in as far as he claims that what he did was because he was essentially brainwashed into doing it. Like, if you hear him describe it, that's sort of, he doesn't use those exact words, but that's basically what he's saying. So he's not taking any accountability. He said that the FBI had, quote, nothing to do with what happened on that day of infamy. And he blamed Fox News for, quote, peddling election integrity CTs. And he blamed Orange Man. He then said that he now believes what happened that day was a, quote, insurrection. Epps' lawyer claimed people called Epps the B slur. I'm not going to use that word. You guys know it. You can read it. On the 5th, when Epps was recorded on video urging attendees to go into the building the next day. Baked Alaska, who is a live streamer and was live streaming that night, had a group of other people around him when Epps said that, started chanting, "Fed, Fed, Fed." But Epps' lawyer claimed that Epps was trying to de-escalate and that Baked Alaska and others didn't listen to him, quote unquote. And again, you're not going to get this information anywhere else because nobody else attended the hearing, really, except me and a small number of people that were able to listen to this. Hopefully the transcripts will be released, though. I want everybody to be able to read for themselves what occurred. Epps' lawyer then claimed that Ray Epps, quote, just said we should go down to the Capitol, and claimed he never told people to go in. And what was shocking to me is, like, number one, we've all seen the video, and it's very clear he emphasizes the word in. That video has been posted everywhere. So to even try to make this argument, I thought was highly foolish. But Judge Boasberg says nothing. The prosecutors say nothing. They don't interject and say, actually, that's not true. You know, he's on video multiple times using the word into, telling people to go into. So for them not to dispute that, like I said, with any other Day of Infamy defendant, they would not let this fly. We have seen video evidence that contradicts this. Epps' lawyer then made a big thing about how Epps, in a post-Day of Infamy interview with a citizen journalist, talked about what happened that day being quote-unquote symbolic. And again, it was like, this almost seemed like an apologetics thing. You know what Christian apologetics are? It seemed like this was the apologetics of Ray Epps. You know, where they played 5 minutes of this. It was a 7-minute interview, and it was, you know, some guy that was there that the Day of Infamy that was streaming or something, or it must have been right after. And, you know, that guy hadn't gone in or anything, but he was interviewing Epps, and Epps was talking about, well, you know, what happened was, it was symbolic. And so they were allowed to play this 5-minute clip of Epps speaking that, again, they're taking select things to try to paint him in the most positive light. So I thought it was wild that the government didn't object to that, allowed that whole thing to be played. And then his lawyer says that, well, to Ray Epps, what happened on the Day of Infamy was just a, quote, symbolic amplification of his voice. So I will be interested to see if other Day of Infamy defendants will now use this argument in court that, well, my client just saw what happened that day as symbolic, and just as a symbolic amplification of his voice, you know? And then this was the most amazing part. Ray Epps' defense lawyer made an astounding admission, and his defense lawyer is this man, I forget his name, but he's got pepper, you know, salt and pepper gray hair. Older man, you know, heavier guy. He makes this admission. He says that, you know, after the government reviewed footage of what happened that day of Ray Epps and his conduct, in 2021, the government made a formal decision not to charge Epps. So in 2021, the government formally decided they were not going to charge him with anything. And so he brought this up to argue that, well, now that they've charged him with this one misdemeanor, he's being treated unfairly because they formally said in 2021 they weren't going to charge him. And it's like, no, he's getting special treatment. getting treated unfairly, but what an admission. In 2021, the government formally decided to charge him with nothing after they had him on a most wanted list. I thought that was fascinating. And again, I don't see anybody else talking about this. If you weren't there to hear it personally, in the gallery, you wouldn't know. Epps's lawyer argued that probation for him as a sentence would promote accountability. I don't see how. Epps, in his statement, not only lashed out at Fox News, but what he called the Orange Man cult, who he blames for his conduct. He then praised the FBI and Antifa, saying conclusively they had, quote, no involvement in the day of infamy, and that only angry Orange Man supporters were part of the quote unquote mob. Epps said that the election was not stolen and that he wants to spend the rest of his life trying to explain that to others. So that's what he wants to do with his life, I guess. He just wants to forever talk about this one thing and giving us the quote unquote truth. I guess that will be his apologetics. Maybe he can write an exegesis for us about it. He wants to speak about the, quote, truth of the election results, and he assured Judge Boasberg he no longer gets his information from Fox News and he trusts the government. Boasberg, for his part, then praised the government for being, quote unquote, balanced in their presentation at the sentencing hearing. He said, I know it's sometimes difficult to do that. Like, is anybody else getting balanced treatment by the government at their sentencing hearings, where they're, trying to throw everything but the kitchen sink at these people? Judge Boasberg claimed that Ray Epps' initial conduct, quote, probably warranted jail time. I mean, he said that essentially it did, but he then cited Ray Epps' extensive cooperation with the government, the Day of Infamy FARCE Committee, the Senate Select Committee, etc., and other quote-unquote mitigating factors to give him a sentence of 12 months probation with no travel restrictions. He then went on to give a sort of pontification about what occurred, saying that what happened that day was a, quote, insurrection, and he slammed, quote, CTs, who claimed that the FBI was involved, and he said, hopefully, this will set that matter to rest. And I'm just sitting here watching this thinking, my God, what is happening? Judge Boasberg says, he says, more important than Epps' conduct on the Day of Infamy was, quote, what happened after. And he cites Epps and his wife as, quote unquote, victims of these CTs and, quote, harassment, which he claims is at a level he hasn't, quote, seen before. So there you have it. Epps is a, quote, unique and complicated case and is a, quote, victim of widespread CTs, unquote, totally not an informant, a glowy Fed working for a contractor that contracts with the feds, or working for another agency, organization, or potentially even other country or an agency associated with them, which is why he got this amazing sweetheart deal in praise from the government and the secret FISA judge. LOL. Yeah, like the judge that signed off on Spygate. And then there's an addendum I forgot to add how Judge Boasberg kind of, brushed aside the video played of Epps helping to, so they had pushed this massive Trump flag. It's a flag, but it's spread out and it had poles around it. It's over 20 feet long. So it's like a big sign, actually, that's over a 20-foot long sign, basically. So he disregards, he kind of brushed over how Epps was helping to push this thing into a line of officers by claiming that, quote, anyone might put their hand up to protect their head if a big sign is coming over. So yes, I can understand if the sign's being passed over, you put your hand up maybe to protect your head, but that's not what we saw on the video that was played at the sentencing hearing. They played a video that showed an aerial view and then it showed two side views, and you can very clearly see his hand on it, but it looks like he's leaning forward and pushing it with others. And so for me, like, I don't see, again, anybody else being given that benefit of the doubt. They could have been doing something innocuous. It's like, well, no, you always assume the worst and try to make innocuous behavior look like it's something bad. So again, he just got very special treatment. That was actually amazing. I'm sure no other defendant got this benefit of the doubt. Again, that contrasts the video evidence of what happened that day. I have my own personal website there. I've got donation links if you want to support my work. I have crypto links there, and I have Cash App and DonorBox, some other things as well, if you want to, support your girl so I can keep attending these events. And I added my thread on what happened to Stephen Horn, the journalist who was charged with 4 misdemeanors for that same day of infamy, and how he got treated by the government versus how Epps got treated. It's very fascinating, and I'm sure that you guys are definitely going to want to check that out. Okay, so that's it. That's my thread. You can find that on the X platform, and it's got almost 500,000 views. If you guys please do me a favor, share it, spread it. More and more people need to see and read for themselves what happened at that hearing from somebody who was there in person. Now, I also want to let you know, you can go to kankfilm.com to support my documentary on the Fednapping, which is tied to what happened on the day of infamy. This was the trial run, if you will, the precursor. You can support that by going to the donate button. We've got links here. You can do so anonymously. And I do want to bring up Eric Molitor is one of 5 men who was acquitted in connection to the Fednapping hoax. But being acquitted does not mean that you get your life back. They have not been given restitution for all of the legal fees they've had to pay, all the money they've had to put out through this time, in the reputational damage that they've taken. Eric is struggling with CPTSD right now for everything he's gone through. So he's made a Give, Send, Go. I wanted to share it with you guys. If you can support him in any way, even if it's just a couple bucks, anything could help. And I know he would be truly grateful. He waited for a long time to ask for help. He didn't want to, and I know how hard it is to ask for help. Trust me, I've learned to have to humble myself to get the documentary done. He says, "My name is Eric Molitor. I was falsely accused of taking part in a plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. My residence was raided by 40-plus FBI and state police during a family dinner on October 7, 2020. They pointed weapons at my mom, sister, cousins, one of whom is a child, nephew, son, and daughter. They pulled up in an armored vehicle in full military kit, consisting of military camp clothing, ballistic armor, ballistic helmets with night vision goggles, and of course, the weapons. I spent 3 months in jail over a government setup and FBI lies, then spent the next 3 years waiting for the trial. It came down to myself as well as 2 other very brave souls named Bill and Michael Null. They should be getting credit as well. All of them were acquitted, all 3, after a month-long trial. All 3 of us had the same charges, 1 count of providing material support to a T or T organization, and 1 count of felony firearm. Found not guilty by a jury of our peers unanimously. The judge said, "You gentlemen are free to go," like nothing ever happened. No apology, no explanation of what actually just happened to our lives. We still feel this weight. It isn't over. This has lit a fire in us to run for elected seats. This, however, is a major chore for me now. I've been diagnosed with CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. He has major social anxieties. He suffers from depression. It's difficult for Eric to be in public places for long periods of time. He has trouble maintaining his focus. He zones off. Losing sight of tasks he's trying to work on. Again, trying to rebuild your life after having it taken from you, essentially. He's in counseling right now, but it's very hard for him to function day to day, especially maintaining a steady job, which this has never been a problem. That was never a problem for him before in his life until he was victimized in this way. He has always enjoyed working. He was a supervisor before. He has to pay child support for his children that were taken from him because of this case. So he owes back child support from when he was incarcerated for something he didn't do, and lost the ability to work and earn money for years. So he wants to go through a Pathfinder school. He wants to go through this course, which that's something he is interested in doing, and it's something that he feels would not that he wouldn't have to be. He could be around people, but in the way that he wants to, which is helping people. He wants to learn to help people better. He likes being outside. He likes teaching people about nature and natural living, and he's hoping to raise enough money to attend these classes so he has somewhere to start from, and he wants to eventually do that type of training himself. And he wants to thank his lawyer, Mr. Barnett, who took on a case that was destined for a bad end and fought harder than anyone I've known. He says, because of his dedication, loyalty, trust, and faith, we were able to walk out of those doors. I have been very blessed. I do public speaking engagements, which is a torture for him in his current condition, struggling with the anxiety, social anxiety, the PTSD, etc. But when you have a unique ability and you want to do something, you have a duty to do it, and there are costs associated with that. So if anybody, wants to have him do a speaking engagement, you can do so. And even though that's something that's hard for him, he wants to do it. He wants to help and speak out for and advocate for the 5 men that are still in there for something they didn't do. So he would love the ability to do that. So if you can help him in any way, I will include a link to this in the video description, and it would mean a lot to me. I know it would mean a lot to him. Finally, I did want to bring this to your attention because, what happened to these men is not, it didn't happen in a vacuum, right? Like, it is, they're still doing this stuff. Undercover FBI agents helped autistic teen plan trip to join that organization. 4 agents posing as these people began chatting with him online when he was just 16 years old and was arrested on T charges weeks after his 18th birthday. I mean, they targeted a child who has the mind of a child. What is happening here? No, this needs to stop. They need to be shut down. They target people that have developmental disabilities. They find the weakest person. This is what bullies do, because they can't pick on someone their own size or someone that has the same level of resources they have. They don't want an even playing field. They're cowards. So they go after people who can't fight back, who don't have the ability to. They target the weakest people. How sickening. How cowardly, too. Yeah, let's target the developmentally disabled children and spend years trying to manipulate them and then arrest them for it. Unacceptable in this country. Why is this happening? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the 5 men that were falsely framed in this hoax are still incarcerated for something they didn't do. That's why. Because a precedent was set. Remember what Jason Chambers said. Mission is to KILL the governor specifically. That was Special Agent Jason Chambers saying that, not these men. That's why this happens, because we still haven't fixed what they did back then in 2020. It just makes me sick. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed hearing my perspective here, and this became long as well, but hopefully that was helpful.